everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I, of course, am just another heavy metal maniac, and today I am indeed ranking all of the studio albums from legendary German thrash metal band, one of the Teutonic 4, or Teutonic 3, depending on who you ask. Sodom, one of my personal favorite thrash metal bands, one of my favorite bands in general. And yeah, today we're going to be going over all 16 of their studio albums. We're not counting any of their EPs, demos, compilations, live albums, any of that stuff. We're only going to be focusing on the 16 studio albums that they have released so far. And yeah, without further ado, enough of my ramblings, let's just get right into the rankings. And of course, we are starting at number 16 with last place. My number 16 choice is Masquerade Blood, released in 1995. So, it's pretty well known that the 90s was not a great decade to be a thrash metal band. You look at pretty much all the old school thrash metal bands, and they all, or well, the overwhelming majority of them became casualties of the 90s in some way or another. Because obviously, in the early 90s, thrash started to die out, and groove metal took its place, and this was also the rise of industrial metal, alternative metal, new metal. The 90s was not a great time to be a thrash metal band. And Sodom, while I don't think that this kind of mid-90s output is like as bad as some of their contemporaries, this album it's not very good in my opinion. This is like one of the few Sodom albums I will dog, because for the most part this band is consistently awesome. But this album, you can kind of tell just by listening to it that this band was definitely in a weird place. It's kind of a mashup of like crossover thrash, groove metal, and even like almost death metal at points, and I don't know, it's just kind of a weird, uneven album. The production of this album is also kind of weak in my opinion. It's just kind of listless and like it just doesn't sound very good on a production standpoint in my opinion. I think there's like good ideas on this album, but for the most part, I just think the execution could have been a lot better. It could have been a lot worse, alright? This isn't like down there at the bottom with like Least Successful Human Cannibal or Endorama. Like, again, I think this album is better than like what some of their contemporaries were doing, but yeah, Masquerade Blood, this just is not a very strong album in my opinion. I'm probably not going to return to this one very often. So yeah, that's why for me it lands at number 16. And coming in now at number 15, it is Get What You Deserve, released in 1994. This was the first album of kind of like this wonky little kind of trilogy, this weird little trilogy in Sodom's discography. This album is kind of where they started to embrace a lot more of like a crossover thrash kind of sound, as opposed to just the kind of like normal, very heavy thrash that this band was known for previously. There's a lot more like hardcore punk energy on this album. This album, like this and Masquerade Blood to me are kind of interchangeable. I think Get What You Deserve is a little bit better maybe. I don't know. It's still to me just kind of a weird, kind of wonky, slightly disjointed album. The production on it is like pretty rough too. Not like in an endearing way like some of their other albums. It's just, this album just does not sound very good on a production standpoint. It's very raw, and the drums kind of sound bad in my opinion. Yeah, again, they were in a weird place. They were, 1994, this was when thrash metal at this point had like pretty much completely like died out, and groove metal had pretty much just replaced it. Then this was the year Far Beyond Driven by Pantera went to number 1 on the Billboard 200, so yeah. 1994, in a lot of ways it was a great year for metal, and in a lot of ways it was a very bad year for metal as well. Yeah, Get What You Deserve, terrible album cover too. Like, both of the album covers are pretty bad. Like, one is just like the band standing whatever, and the other one like the dead fat dude on a bed with sex dolls. It's weird. Yeah, this album is just not very good in my opinion. Get What You Deserve, it lands at number 15 for me. Again, just like Masquerade Blood, I'm not going to be returning to this one that often. Coming in now at number 14, it is The Final Sign of Evil, which was released in 2007. This album is kind of interesting. So what this album is it's basically like what the band wanted their first album to be, pretty much. So obviously their first like release was the EP In the Sign of Evil, which is a fucking banger, obviously. But they kind of had to record and release that EP because, from what I read, like they originally wanted to do a full length, but because of like budget and like time constraints and like the label like couldn't afford it or kind of something along those lines, they had to release In the Sign of Evil as an EP, and there was a bunch of like other songs that were like left off of it. So yeah, this album is basically, it's every song that was on the In the Sign of Evil re-recorded, and then also the songs that were originally supposed to be their debut album. So this is basically what the band wanted their debut album to be. This was a big dramatic shift from like the band previously, because they had been on a very consistent trajectory up until this point. This production is much more raw, and they're kind of embracing more of that kind of first wave black metal sound, like they did on some of their older albums. But to me, this album is it's just there. Like, this album just to me is just not very interesting. It's not very well done. It's kind of just like, I would just rather listen to In the Sign of Evil, and it's going to be awesome. Like, this re-recording to me just kind of doesn't really do it justice. Yeah, it's kind of cool to hear some of the songs that they originally that were like kind of like lost, but I don't know. This album to me, it just doesn't really do much. It's just kind of there, and you like listen to it, and like, I mean, it's Sodom, like, but I don't know. Like, it feels like, to me, like, it doesn't feel authentic, really, if that makes sense. Like, you listen to, you know, the early, more raw stuff, it's because they were young, hungry, and, like, you know, they weren't as seasoned as musicians as they were when they made this album. You know, this was 21 years, this was 23 years after In the Sign of Evil came out. And, it just kind of feels, I don't know. It's just kind of a strange, odd listen, and I don't really enjoy it that much, which is why, for me, The Final Sign of Evil, I don't think it's bad, necessarily. I don't think it's, like, dog shit. But for me, it lands at number 14, just because I would just, again, if I want to listen to these songs, I'm just going to listen to In the Sign of Evil instead, and it will be awesome. And coming in at number 13, it is Till Death Do Us Unite, released in 1997. Now, this is kind of the final album of that little weird crossover thrash groove metal trilogy that they had in the mid to late 90s. And I think this album is the best of that trilogy, although I don't think this is like an outstanding album necessarily or anything. For one, I think this album was an improvement in a few spots. For one, the production of this album is definitely better than the two that came before. It's the guitars are nice and crunchy. It sounds like kind of full production and not like weak and listless like Masquerade was. And there are actually some songs in here that I think are like pretty decent. Like Suicidal Justice, I think, is a good song. I like Sow the Seeds of Discord. It kind of has like almost like a Megadeth like vibe. I got like a Megadeth vibe from that song. Like, the riff kind of feels like a Rust in Peace riff, almost. I thought that song was pretty good. Yeah, a lot of this is just kind of like maybe fairly standard like crossover thrash. Not really what I want out of Sodom. But if I had to pick one of these, like one of the crossover albums to go and listen to, it would definitely be this one. Yeah, I think it's a decent album. I think it's an okay album. The worst thing about it is the album cover, which, if you're on screen, it's on screen right now, you're looking at it. What the fuck were they thinking when they saw this and were like, yeah, we want this to be the album cover? What? Tom Angel Ripper, I know you're not watching this, but I have to ask you, what the fuck were you smoking when who came up with this, and who decided that this was a good idea? This is like one of the worst album covers I've ever seen. It's bad. Yeah, the worst thing about this album is by far and away the album cover. It is a terrible album cover. The album itself is just kind of okay. So yeah, Till Death Do Us Unite lands for me at number 13. And coming in at number 12, it is Epitome of Torture, released in 2013. This album is not bad. It's just, for me, this is kind of just a their album. It feels kind of a bit just like, I guess Sodom by numbers is maybe kind of the appropriate way to put it. Like, listening to it, yeah, it's a Sodom album. It's Sodom, writing Sodom songs. It's got Sodom riffs all over the place. It's not the crossover stuff. That's cool. It's not the Final Sign of Evil. It's just, to me, like, it's just kind of there. I mean, it's got some great songs on it still. Like, I like Stigmatized. I think that's just a banger. Into the Skies of War, I think, is a really good song too. Yeah, this album it's not bad. Again, I would return to it over any of the ones I mentioned previously. But yeah, just to me, compared to some of the band's other albums, this one just kind of isn't as strong. Even compared to like some of their like other material that's coming out around this time, it's just not as strong in my opinion. But yeah, I do still like this album. Again, those songs I mentioned, I think, are absolutely awesome. Epitome of Torture just lands for me at number 12 because I think they have albums that are much stronger. So, coming in at number 11 now, it is their self-titled album, which was released in 2006. I think this is a good album. Now we've kind of gotten, I think, out of the like the albums I would consider to be just like mediocre or even like bad. Like I think all the albums from here on are like good. These are all albums I think are good. And some they are for the most part a very very consistently just awesome, intense thrash metal band. Yeah, the self-titled album, I think it's good. It's always a ballsy move to like be releasing a self-titled album like many years into your career, like 20 years after your debut album comes out, you release a self-titled album. And I think Tom Angel Rivers even said in an interview, he literally said it's just because every band needs a self-titled album, which I thought was kind of funny. But to me, if you're gonna do like a self-titled album, a self-titled album to me is just like, if you're doing one later in your career, it's just kind of like, hey, it's you announcing to the world, we are Sodom, this is what we sound like, this album is a representation of us. And to me, this is not really the best representation of Sodom. There are some good songs in here still. Blood on Your Lips is a really cool song, Buried in the Justice Ground, City of God, Lay Down the Law. There's some really good songs in here. It's just not their strongest album in my opinion. Like, again, to me, it's not like fully, like, it's not like, how can I put this into words? It doesn't feel like it should be like a self-titled album, Like, it feels like it should have a different name, because this doesn't feel like a good representation of what Sodom is, because I think they just have much stronger albums than this. But that's not to say this album is bad by any means. I think it is good, and I think, again, the songs I mentioned are great. I would return to this one again. It's just, for me, I think they have much stronger albums, which is why, for me, the self-titled lands at number 11. And coming in at number 10, it is Better Off Dead, released in 1990. In comparison to the earlier albums, I think this one is definitely weaker, but there are still some banger songs on here. I think Eye for an Eye is a pretty good song. I like Shellfire Defense, Saw's the Law. Title track's pretty good, Stalin Norgal. I like... it's just, to me, again, in comparison to the other albums in comparison to their other earlier material, this album is definitely not as strong. It has, again, really good songs on it, but even the songs that are good, to me, they aren't particularly heavy hitters like some of their other songs. They aren't whoa, that's fucking incredible. It's no, they're no, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty much just kind of my consensus on this album. It's good, but again, it's sort of just kind of maybe a their album. It's kind of like a lot of thrash bands I feel kind of have this problem. Their early material is great, but there's always kind of that one album that kind of sticks out as not as strong. I feel Testament has that with Practice What You Preach. Exodus has that with Pleasures of the Flesh. This is kind of this is Sodom's version of that album, pretty much. It's good. I would return to it again, but it's just not. It's not as strong in my opinion. Not all the songs hit as hard as I feel they should, maybe. But yeah. So yeah, but Better Off Dead for me, it lands at number 10. All right, and coming in at number 9, it is their latest studio offering, Genesis 19, which was released in 2020. Yeah, I think this album is pretty damn good. There's some really banging songs on here. Sodom and Gomorrah is a really cool song. Euthanasia is a banger. Glock and Roll, the title's kind of silly, but that song is a jammer. I like Indoctrination and Friendly Fire, which I believe Sodom and Gomorrah, Indoctrination, and Friendly Fire were all released as singles prior to this album's release. So yeah, the singles I think are definitely the best songs on here. But there are the other songs. I think this album is good. Some of the songs in here are longer. They have songs that are more than 6 minutes. I think the longest song on this album is 7.5 minutes long. But to me they're well written. I don't get bored by this album really at all. It's number 9, but I do think this is a pretty damn good album. And it's just number 9 for me, just because I don't think it really goes toe to toe with their classic albums, which if you'll see in this ranking, I like classic Sodom a lot. But Genesis 19, I would happily return to this album again. I think it is pretty good. So yeah, Genesis 19, it's number 9. And coming in at number 8, it is Decision Day, released in 2016. Yeah, this album is pretty killer again. It's kind of middle of the pack, just because there's other albums that I think are stronger, but there's other albums that I think are weaker as well. And there's some absolutely banging songs on this album. In Retribution, I think, is a really cool opener. Rolling Thunder is honestly one of my favorite songs. I think that's one of the best songs I've ever written. That riff is just, man, that riff is catchy. Vaginal Born Evil, I think, is a pretty good song. Belligerence, I think, is pretty cool too. Sacred Warpath. It's kind of more like mid, like, it's not as just like brutal, fast, and in your face at all times. It kind of like slow things down a bit at points, which I think makes this album, makes these songs kind of stand out maybe a little bit more. And again, it's not like full blown like groove metal. Like, there's just, it's not as pummeling, as intense, but I think that kind of makes this album stand out a bit more in their discography. Because this band does get compared a lot to Slayer because they are just very fast, brutal, intense, thrash, and it's not hard to see. And yeah, I think that comparison is very apt. By the way, I did a Slayer ranking, so go watch that if you haven't. Anyways, Decision Day. Yeah, this is a pretty banging album. I like the production. I think it's heavy. It's like a bit more modern, but it's not like too clean or too polished for Sodom. It's very heavy and dirty sounding. Yeah, I think again, not much else to say. This is a banger album. It's got some really great songs. Decision Day is number 8. And coming in now at number 7, it is their 1986 debut, Obsessed by Cruelty. This is one of the most different sounding Sodom albums on the production front. Production is much more raw than some of their later albums, and this has a much more prominent first wave black metal sound. This is kind of more along the lines of stuff like, Bathory or Venom, Celtic Frost, stuff like that. Yeah, I'd say a lot of these riffs at points kind of feel closer to speed metal as opposed to just like full-blown thrash metal, but this is still like, I think, mostly a thrash metal album. This is also different kind of for like the lyrical themes as well, because Sodom obviously is mostly known for their lyrics. They're dealing with war, like the Vietnam War and the history of warfare and stuff like that, but this was like their album where they had a much more overtly satanic, blasphemous lyrical content. Which is, again, makes them kind of cool and stand out. And there's some absolutely amazing songs on here. Death Like Silence is a great song, and obviously for all you black metal nerds out there, this was the song that Euronymous named his little label after, so this pretty cool part of like metal history there. Proselytism Real, I think is good too. Equinox, After the Deluge, Witchhammer. Yeah, I think this is I love the album cover. It's just like I think the album cover is cool, weird, evil, creepy shit. I think this is a very iconic album, and Obsessed by Cruelty, very raw, very different sounding. Yeah, this is a pretty good album in my opinion. It's number 7 for me, just because I think there's a few that are stronger, but I would happily return to this one again. I do enjoy it. It's a lot of fun to listen to. And coming in at number 6, it is In War and Pieces, released in 2010. Now, of this band's more, I guess you call it modern output, even though it sounds 14 years old, this is like my favorite of their at least of their 2010s, 2020s output so far. This one is my favorite. I really, really dig this album. I think there's some absolutely banging songs on here. I think the title track is absolutely awesome, one of my favorite Sodom songs. Hellfire is really good too. Nothing Counts More Than Blood, Storm Raging Up. God Bless You is really cool as well. Yeah, again, I really like the production of this album. It's a bit more modern, but it's not like too clean, too polished. It's still very, very heavy and dirty sounding. The guitars have this nice thrashy crunch to them. Yeah, I think there's some really kind of cool melodies, kind of cool harmonies on here, but it still, manages to keep that brutality and that intensity that you want out of a Sodom album. And Tom Angel Ripper, he sounds like consistently great across most of these albums. Like, he is, I think, a great thrash metal vocalist. Like, he sounds awesome, and he sounds really good on this album. And yeah. Again, of their like more modern output, this is definitely my favorite album that they've released. I think it's absolutely killer. I would happily jam it over and over again, for sure. Number 5 on my list is Code Red, released in 1999. This was, to me, their big comeback album after the questionable period from Get What You Deserve to Till Death Do Us Unite. And yeah, this is, I think, one of the all-time great thrash metal comeback albums. This is like right up there with like Violent Revolution from Creator, Art of Dying by Death Angel. This was like a return to form. Like, okay, we're not trying to do groove metal. We're not trying to be punky anymore. We're just going to do straight up vicious, heavy thrash metal like we were known for in the 80s and the early 90s. So yeah, let's just get in the studio and write some absolutely killer shit. And they did. The title track is absolutely awesome. What Hell Can Create. Tombstone has a really cool bass intro. Vice of Killing, I think, is a really good song. I love The Wolf and the Lamb. That's a really good song too. Yeah, they came in here and just absolutely swinging. I think the production of this album sounds really good. Again, it's really, really heavy, and dirty sounding. Tom Angel Ripper, he sounds amazing. Yeah, this is like again this is a great comeback album. This was a great return to form. They were lost at one point, but then they were like, "Hey, let's just do what we do. We are Sodom. Let's just." This to me like kind of could have been a self-titled album really, because this is a perfect representation of Sodom in a lot of ways. That's not like one of their classics, you know what I mean? But anyways, Code Red, I love this album. This number 5 for me. I think it's an absolute banger for sure. And coming in now at number 4 is Persecution Mania, released in 1987. This album marked a bit of an evolution for Sodom. This was obviously the album that came out right after Obsessed by Cruelty. Got a lot of the kind of early first wave black metal sound. The production on this is still kind of raw, but it's not as raw as Obsessed by Cruelty. Guitars are thicker and crunchier. Overall, it's just got tighter and punchier. I think the songwriting definitely improved. This was also kind of a shift in the lyrical themes. While there's some like stuff has to do with like anti-religion on here, it's mostly about war and like anti-fascism, politics, stuff like that, which obviously it's basically become this band's shtick over the years. And there are some absolutely banging songs on here again. Nuclear Winter, I think, is a banger. I like Electrocution a lot. The title track is really, really solid. Christ Passion, Bombenhagel. Yeah, I think it's kind of cool. The lead there is like the German national anthem. I think that is really neat. They do a pretty killer cover of Iron Fist by Motorhead on here too, which I think they did a really solid job. It's a great cover. Yeah, Persecution Mania, this is a very iconic album, obviously, and I do love it. It's number 4. It's the album that's currently playing in the background, if you can hear it. Yeah, I think this is an absolutely banging album. Number 4 for me, I think it's awesome. And coming in now at number 3, it is Agent Orange, released in 1989. I think by general consensus, this might be regarded as this band's best album, their finest hour. I think this is by far probably their most iconic album. And it's not hard to see why. This is an absolutely banging album. I do really, really dig the shit out of it. Every song on here is like super memorable. Like again, to me, like the song, even Obsessed by Cruelty, it's a really good album. But to me, they just kind of improved as songwriters, and they improved on, you know, just being better riff writers and stuff from that, like that. But this, and yeah, the production of this album is like perfect. It still, I think, sounds pretty decent for It was great for 1989 standards, and I think it still sounds pretty decent by today. The guitars are nice and crunchy. The drums are tight and punchy. Bass sounds great. Agent Orange, the title track, is one of like maybe their most iconic song. That song is awesome. Tired in Red is a banger too. Remember the Fallen, I really like. Magic Dragon, Ausgebombt is one of my favorite songs, like probably top 5 favorite songs, honestly. I love the shit out of Ausgebombt. And Baptism of Fire, ooh, that song is an absolute jammer. Yeah, I love this album. This is one of the greatest thrash metal albums ever made, without a doubt. It's one of the most iconic thrash metal albums ever made. Like, if you're making a list of, like, you know, 10 essential thrash metal albums, this is an album that would have to be on there. Have to be on there, for sure. Yeah, this is like a perfect album that perfectly represents the mood and the spirit of Teutonic thrash. Yeah, I absolutely love this album. It's number 3 for me, just because there's 2 more that I think are slightly better, but like again, just like by a like a nano inch, by a nano inch of a nano inch. Yeah, Agent Orange, absolutely a banging album. Number 3. Coming in at number 2, it is Tapping the Bane, released in 1992. This is probably their heaviest album. Like on this album, there is a much more kind of prominent death metal influence on this album, and you can definitely hear it. Like some of the songs on here, you can honestly just straight up call like death thrash songs. Like this album is fucking heavy. The guitar tone is absolutely gnarly. There's just like it's just a vicious, hostile, aggressive album. It's got just great riffs. It's got great grooves all over the place. It's riff city. The opening track, Body Parts, it immediately just throws you into the meat grinder. Skinned Alive is an amazing song. One Step Over the Line is incredible. Bullet in the Head, The Crippler, Jesus Christ, that is like one of their heaviest songs. I love The Crippler, it's amazing. Back to War is absolutely killer. Again, I love every song on this album. Every song stands out from one another. This album is just, again, super heavy. It's kind of an interesting album, too, because 1992, again, this was the time when thrash metal was slowly starting to die out and groove metal was starting to take its place. It almost feels like, but this was also the time when death metal was, you know, starting to come up. You know, we started getting all the big death metal bands, Cannibal Corpse, Entombed, Dismember, Suffocation, now we're all popping up at this point. It almost feels like Sodom kind of looked at like the landscape of what was happening. We're like, what if we just made it? What if we like still played thrash mode? What if we just made it heavier? And boy, they did. And this album absolutely whoops ass. Yeah, I love this album. The album cover is kind of whatever. He looks like a giant buff blue Smurf. I love Canaran Hines as a mascot. I think he's awesome, but he looks a little goofy on this album cover, in my opinion. But yeah, Tapping the Bane. I love this album. This is my favorite of their 90s, of their kind of more classic era, I guess you'd say. This is my favorite album of theirs. Number 2, I absolutely love it. And coming in at number 1, it is M16, released in 2001. This has kind of always kind of been my number 1 album from this band. I absolutely love this album. This is like a perfect thrash metal album, in my opinion. This is one of my all-time favorite albums, period. It was in my top 50 favorite metal albums list for a reason. I think it's absolutely fucking amazing. Again, every single song on here hits. Every single song stands out to me. There's not a single... Well, okay, maybe... If I had one slight complaint about this album, it's the Surfing Bird cover. That was just kind of unnecessary, in my opinion, but at least it's at the end. It doesn't ruin the album for me at all, because all the other songs are fucking amazing. Among the Weird Con, I Am the War, Napalm in the Morning, Genocide is an absolute ripper, M6, the title track is fucking incredible too, Cannon Fodder is an awesome song. I think the production of this album it still sounds great, but I think by modern day standards, the guitar tone is fucking nasty. Tom, he sounds great. Yeah, I absolutely love this album. This is one of my all-time favorite metal albums, one of my all-time favorite albums, period. This is like top 10 thrash metal album for me. I absolutely love it, and yeah, this is my favorite M16, my favorite album by one of my favorite bands, and of course that concludes this video. If you made it to the end, you are awesome, and I appreciate you. Do consider hitting the like button if you enjoy this video. Consider subscribing as well, because I do have a lot more content coming your way. Leave a comment down below. Tell me, do you agree with my rankings? Do you disagree? Let me know. And yeah, that about does it. I'm just another heavy metal maniac. I'll see you all sometime in the future. In the meantime, all of you take care and have a great day. So long.